You're listening to KPFA 94.1 in Berkeley, 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, and 88.1 KFCF in Fresno.
It's 7 in the morning, and this is Upfront for Monday, October 24th, 2016. I'm Mitch, Jeserich. Cat Brooks is out. Today we continue our series of debates on local measures, and today it's rent control, as 6 cities across the Bay Area are considering such measures. We'll be joined by Joseph Tobener. He litigates for tenant rights and is a supporter of rent control. And Wayne Rowland, president of the East Bay Rental Housing Association. He is against it. And then after the 7:30 news, we'll sit down with Tim Redmond of 48hills.org and the San Francisco Bay Guardian newspaper. And we'll talk about San Francisco politics and the influence of tech money in this year's election. That's all next after these news headlines with Eileen Alfandary.
I am Eileen Alfandary with news headlines for KPFA. Donald Trump is vowing to sue every woman who has accused him of sexual assault or other inappropriate behavior. Trump made the comments at a rally in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
Nearly a dozen women publicly have accused Trump of unwanted advances or sexual assault in the week since a 2005 recording emerged in which the former reality TV star boasted of getting away with assaulting women. The latest came on Saturday when an adult film actress said the billionaire kissed her and 2 other women on the lips without asking for permission when they met after a golf tournament in 2006. Jessica Drake said Trump later asked her to go out to dinner or attend a party with him, and after she turned him down, offered her $10,000 in use of his private jet if she accepted. Hillary Clinton campaigned in North Carolina with the so-called Mothers of the Movement, women whose children were killed by police or vigilantes.
I want to work with all of you, and particularly with people like the Mothers of the Movement, to reform our criminal justice system so that it works fairly for everyone. You see, I believe that America is safer, our homes and our neighborhoods are safer, when everyone respects the police and the police respect everyone.
President Obama campaigned in Nevada for Clinton and for the Democrat in the race to replace retiring Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. Nevada Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto is locked in a tight race with Republican Representative Joe Heck. Today is the last day to register to vote or change the voter registration address for the November election. In San Francisco, homeless rights advocates are registering people who live on the streets. Corinne Smith caught up with them.
California law does not require an address in order to register to vote, and so San Francisco activists have launched an outreach initiative called the Unhoused Voter Registration Encampment to encourage those living on San Francisco streets to exercise their voting right. Organizer Pearl Abungan.
Even though they are unhoused, they can still vote. All you need are the last 4 digits of your social, the streets, the 2 cross streets where you most likely stay. That will determine your precinct.
Activist and contributor to Poor Magazine, Queen Nandi, called for reparations.
So, this is not just a homeless problem. This is a hoarder problem. And it doesn't have anything to do with people with mental health issues or they're hoarders or clutterers. What about the hoarders and the clutterers of the money that is needed for the people to live lives and be productive citizens? But instead, you send the police out and you kill people, and you send the Department of Water and Public Works out to throw away people's medication, to throw away people's important papers, their Social Security cards, their birth certificates, and then you want to criminalize them?
Advocates will be canvassing San Francisco neighborhood encampments until the voter registration deadline on Monday. In San Francisco, I'm Corinne Smith, KPFA Pacifica.
New York State has enacted one of the nation's toughest restrictions on Airbnb. The statewide law authorizes fines of up to $7,500 for many short-term rentals. The measure, signed into law by Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo, applies to rentals of fewer than 30 days when the owner or tenant is not present. Such rentals have been against the law since 2010. The new law does not apply to rentals in single-family homes, row houses, or apartments, spare rooms if the resident is present. The New York Assembly member who sponsored the legislation said the intention is to go after commercial operators who rent large numbers of vacant units in multi-apartment buildings. Supporters of the law say many property owners use sites like Airbnb to offer apartments as short-term rentals to visitors, hurting existing hotels and taking residential units off the already expensive housing market in New York City. Airbnb said it would immediately file a lawsuit challenging the law. Longtime political peace and social justice activist Tom Hayden has died at his Santa Monica home at the age of 76. Hayden had heart disease and had suffered a stroke last year. In 1960, Hayden helped found Students for a Democratic Society, then dedicated to helping to desegregate the South. In 1962, he became one of the key authors of the landmark Port Huron Statement, a call to students on campuses everywhere to take up political protest. Its opening line, quote, "We are people of this generation, bred in at least modest comfort, housed now in universities, looking uncomfortably at the world we inherit." Speaking on Democracy Now! In 2012, Hayden credited the black students of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, for his early awakening to activism.
I met the young black students from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and I fell in love with them. And it was because they were the alternative to the life of apathetic absurdity that faced those of us like myself. And they were doing something that they believed in at the risk of their own lives and careers and reputations. And I'd never met people who were willing to make that risk. And that was it. I was gradually converted to becoming an activist.
Hayden was a freedom rider for civil rights in the South and was beaten and briefly jailed in Mississippi and Georgia. He became a leader of the movement against the Vietnam War and participated in the large protest outside the Democratic National Convention in 1968, which led to bloody clashes with police. Hayden and 7 others were charged with conspiracy to incite violence. His conviction was later overturned. Hayden turned to electoral politics in California, serving 20 years in the state legislature. He championed environmental and economic justice issues. He unsuccessfully ran for the U.S. Senate, for governor, and for mayor of Los Angeles. Hayden was a frequent commentator on Pacifica Radio. Weather forecast for the San Francisco Bay Area, mostly cloudy skies, highs in the upper 60s, breezy, a slight chance of afternoon rain. In Fresno and the central San Joaquin Valley, chance of morning showers, slight chance of thunderstorms, breezy, high 74 to 79 degrees. I'm Eileen Alfandary, more news on 94.1 at 7:30.
It's just past 7:08 in the morning, and you are listening to Upfront on listener-sponsored KPFA Radio. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Kat Brooks will be back tomorrow. Good morning to you, whether you are just beginning your day or perhaps you're just ending your day. And good morning to you wherever you may be. Good morning, Kristen Thomas, our engineer here in our studio. Very sad news. I'm very saddened to learn about the death of Tom Hayden. I remember early in my career calling up Tom Hayden, who's this historic figure with the Students for Democratic Society, and then also a state senator later on. Well-known anti-war activist, especially you think of what happened in Chicago in 1968, all these things that Tom Hayden was involved in. And the first time I called him up for an interview, he knew exactly who I was, and that meant at the time, and still to this day, so much to me. And so very sorry and very sad to hear about the death today of Tom Hayden. Now, today, after the 7:30 news headlines, we're going to sit down with Tim Redman of 48hills.org and also the San Francisco Bay Guardian, which he's gotten that back to talk about where the big campaign money is going in some of the 24 measures in San Francisco, and also about the role of the tech industry in this election cycle. But right now, we're going to focus on local measures as 6 Bay Area cities are considering rent control initiatives. 5 cities, San Mateo, Burlingame, Mountain View, Alameda, and Richmond, are considering establishing rent control, and the sixth city, Oakland, is considering strengthening its rent adjustment law. It has been reported that the average rent across the 9 Bay Area counties has risen by more than $1,000 since year 2010. Supporters of rent control say that the laws are necessary to keep middle and low-income residents in their homes. Opponents say the real problem is a lack of new housing to meet a growing demand, and that rent control does very little to keep the average rent price down. Today we're going to be in conversation about the broad idea of rent control with two guests who have opposing views on the issue. Joseph Tobener is with Tobener Law Firm. He litigates for tenant rights, and he is a supporter of rent control. He joins us on the telephone. Joseph Tobener, it's my good pleasure to welcome you to this radio program.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Wayne Rowland also joins us. Wayne Rowland is the president of the East Bay Rental Housing Association. He opposes rent control. Wayne Rowland, it's also my good pleasure to welcome you to this program.
Well, thank you. Good morning, and good morning to Joe also.
Good to have everyone on, and I appreciate both of you taking time. Joseph Tobener, let me begin with you. As a supporter of rent control, there are people who will point to San Francisco and perhaps now even Oakland that have had rent control laws in the books for some time now. Sure, there are holes in them, but you probably say that about almost any of these laws. And yet these are now two of the most expensive cities to live in, not just in the country, but perhaps the world. So why should people believe that rent control laws can keep a city or a neighborhood affordable?
Well, first of all, I want to start by saying that these are really historic times in the Bay Area. We're in the midst of a housing crisis that has seen rents increase 66% over the last 5 years, and people are up in arms, and they're ready for a change. Since I was a housing rights advocate during the first .com boom, and this second boom is different than the first boom in that we're seeing people leaving San Francisco altogether, and it's mostly middle-income earners, artists, teachers, civil servants, police officers. So rent control keeps these folks housed in the Bay Area, and I think that these measures are going to be important to doing that.
Well, let me just push my question there. If these people are leaving San Francisco, yet San Francisco has had rent control for many years, could it be argued that rent control there is working?
Well, I think that rent control keeps people housed. There are people who are leaving San Francisco because tech workers are coming in and real estate speculators are buying properties and pushing prices up. But for the most part, we do see that people stay housed in San Francisco who are under rent control.
Wayne Rowland, the cost of living and gentrification are really big issues throughout our region here. I think we all know people are feeling a great deal of anxiety about whether or not they can afford to live here in their homes, where perhaps many of us have lived all of our life. Many have already had to move, and almost everyone I know is thinking of a contingency plan as to what happens if they have to leave. Isn't it easy to understand why people would want rent control in their city?
No, I think it is easy to understand why people would want rent control or their prices of rents to be controlled. But we're not in favor of using rent control as a way of providing affordable housing, although we're very interested, just as everyone else is, in providing affordable housing. We differ on how we what we think is the best methodology for getting us there. We think that the best way of getting there is to build more housing, and one of the things that we're seeing right now is that because of a lot of additional building in the city of San Francisco, the rents are starting to moderate, and they've never moderated in many years, of rent controls. They only have begun to moderate because of new building. But also, one of the main reasons that we're not in favor of these laws in general is that they control the price of rents, but they don't control the expenses that property owners have to pay in order to be able to provide housing. So property owners often get squeezed between the controlled rents and uncontrolled expenses, things like water, gas, electricity, insurance, taxes. These things can go up pretty quickly. And speaking of taxes, for example, if all the tax-related measures in the city of Oakland were to pass, property owners there will see their bills rise by about $1,000. And so that's a scary prospect for a lot of people, property owners providing housing, who know that they will not be able to pass those expenses through to the renters in a timely manner under most of these rent control schemes. So a lot of people get squeezed out. They leave the business, and that reduces the supply of housing, and as a consequence, it causes the rents to go higher. And that's the problem that we're facing today. We've had these laws in effect for many, many years, and when we look up, we end up with housing shortages and very, very high rents.
Wayne Rowland, let me follow up with you on that. You mentioned that you're in favor of affordable housing, the construction of new affordable housing, but that does very little to help people that are currently in an apartment that doesn't have rent control.
Well, take Oakland, for example. We already have rent control, and yet we have some of the highest prices in the entire region, some of the highest prices in the entire country. When you look at the prices that they show that are average rents that people are paying in Oakland, you're not looking at the rent-controlled rents. You're looking at the ones where the property is already on the market and it does not have rent control. We have property owners who look at these newspaper articles that show average rents $3,200 or $3,300, and they're charging $1,200 and $1,300 on an apartment. There's a big disconnect between some of the messages out there in the public and what's actually happening on the ground. So you have people who are already controlled or charging rent-controlled rents, feeling like they're just getting piled on by law after law after law.
Joseph Tobener, there's an argument that rent control actually will increase the average cost of living in the city because of rent control. Landlords are then forced or feel a pressure to raise the rents as soon as they can once you have a new occupant that comes in.
Well, there's been longitudinal studies in San Francisco that have shown that rents do stabilize over time. There was a 70-year study that showed that rents in San Francisco have been stable at 6% because of rent control. I do want to address the point about construction costs and the ability of landlords to pass on improvements to their property. It used to be under the old models of rent control, rent stabilization, that landlords couldn't do that. But these new rent control ordinances aren't your old mom and pop ordinances. These are ordinances that allow landlords to pass on construction costs. Take Alameda M1, for example. That ordinance allows a landlord, a good landlord, to petition for a fair return based on property tax increases in expenditures. So good landlords that are taking care of their property will be able to petition the rent board to get an increase. Secondly, in terms of affordable housing or building new housing, most of the housing that's being built in the Bay Area these days are luxury condos. And there have been studies that have shown that for every 100 luxury condos that are built, we need between 20 and 40 affordable units just to be net neutral. And the reason for that is you build a luxury condo and who moves in but a high-wage earner, and that high-wage earner requires services. Middle-income earners are the ones that provide those services, and they need housing too.
Wayne Rowland, there is this perception out there, I think, amongst people throughout the Bay Area, and you were talking earlier about the cost that apartment owners or landlords have to spend on their property, on the buildings, all those things. But looking at how much the rents have risen around here just in the past 10 years, never mind 20 years, there's a strong perception out there that this isn't just the cost that landowners or apartment owners are having to deal with, that this is really about the market being good and landlords making as much money as they possibly can, regardless of what that means for people living in these buildings.
Well, they could say that, but in cities like San Francisco and Berkeley, where you've already had rent control, in Oakland, for 20-plus years, you still see a lot of property owners or a lot of renters paying $1,200 and $1,500 or less right on the shores of Lake Merritt. They don't, in these laws, they don't have any kind of way of assigning these kind of low prices to people who actually need it, and that's one of the other issues, is that you often have people in parts of East Oakland who are paying more in rent than people who are living on the shores of Lake Merritt. But I want to address something about the costs of the expenses involved in providing housing. In the city of Alameda, has the highest per capita number of Victorians in the country. When Joseph was saying that you can pass through these expenses in these new ordinances, that's not entirely true, because if you have to go into a bureaucracy and go through a bureaucratic process just to change or pass through the expenses of changing windows, and you can't get those expenses to become part of the rent in a timely manner, or the cost of water goes up very quickly. We saw that happen. The cost of taxes can spike. When you can't get those to go up in a timely manner and property owners get squeezed, they just leave the business.
But are property owners getting squeezed right now, or are they making more money than they ever have before?
May I address that?
Well,
yeah, we'll get back to you, Wayne. Let me let Joseph come in, but then Wayne, you'll be able to follow up.
I mean, from my perspective, we've had rent control in San Francisco for 50 years, 40 years, and I don't think there's any listener on this show that's going to feel bad for a property owner in San Francisco. Landlords are making a killing in San Francisco. Who wouldn't want to own a nice 2-unit building in San Francisco and have purchased it, 10 years ago, or even today be able to purchase one of those units? And these are vacancy decontrol statutes. So the landlord can increase the rent as soon as there's a vacancy. And it should be noted also that none of these ordinances are going to apply to single-family homes and condos. So most listeners who own property in San Francisco and the Bay Area, they won't be affected by these new ordinances. They'll be able to go into the rental business and charge whatever they want for their units. These are just multi-family buildings that we're talking about. And certainly in San Francisco and in Oakland, in the last, say, 30 years, landlords are making a killing. Not only are the rents going up at a healthy 6% each year on average, but they're also getting enormous appreciation on those properties. So to feel bad for the landlords in rent control jurisdictions seems a bit absurd.
It's approaching 7:23 in the morning, and you're listening to Upfront. I'm Mitch Jeserich, and we're in conversation with Joseph Tobener and Wayne Rowland. Joseph Tobener is with Tobener Law Firm. He litigates for tenant rights, and he's a supporter of rent control. Wayne Rowland is the president of the East Bay Rental Housing Association. He opposes rent control, and we are having this discussion as there are 6 Bay Area cities on November 8th who will consider rent control measures. Wayne Rowland, let me allow you to respond now.
Well, the part about feeling bad for landlords, that's political talk. We're talking about just the economic impact of these laws on the people who have to abide by them. And the reality is, just like he said, when there's a vacant apartment, there's no controls. But what you have in cities like Oakland is that when a person lives in an apartment for 5, 6, 7 years, their rent is so much lower than market that those units are literally off the market. You have a big chunk of the market that never comes on the market because it's so much lower than the market price for those tenants that they never move. So if you don't build enough housing and you create laws that make it so that no one ever wants to move, then where are the people going to live who are trying to find a place? It's just the fact that the rent-controlled rents are not nearly as high as they're talking about when they talk about the market rents.
Joseph Tobener, you want to take that on?
Well, I'm all in favor of building affordable housing units. Let's do it. Let's not build luxury condos. And I don't find rent control to be mutually exclusive to building affordable housing units. Let's do both. Let's solve the problem by doing both.
I want to throw out
But in San Francisco, building luxury condos has not stabilized rents.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Well, we do see that building those luxury condos has stabilized the rent because people are moving from some apartments and leaving those vacant to move into these new. So you have vacancies. We don't have that in the rent-controlled cities. But I want to add one other thing that I think is important, an important point to make, which is that when the local officials set these laws in motion, they usually don't look back to see whether or not those laws are actually working. So, for example, in Oakland and in Berkeley and in San Francisco, they said that these laws were needed to protect cultural and ethnic diversity. But in every city that has applied these laws, they've had this big exodus of African American residents. And no one looks back to see why. And I think that the architects of these laws should try to find out what's making the African American renter less competitive than everyone else.
Joseph Tobener, what would you say to that?
Well, I think it's real estate speculation. What happens is, even with rent control, real estate speculators can go out of the rental housing business under the Ellis Act. It's a state law problem. The Ellis Act allows a landlord to essentially sell the building to real estate developers who evict all the tenants and then convert the units into TICs and condos. So in the Fillmore district, for example, where there's been a huge black exodus, this is because of TIC and condo projects by real estate speculators. And if we close the Ellis Act loophole, these folks will remain housed in the Bay Area.
I don't think that that's what's happening. I think what happens is that you have people with higher incomes competing for the same rentals as people with lower incomes, and the people with the higher incomes are winning out. And that seems to be happening in all the rent control cities. If you look at the demographics that accompany the imposition of the rent control laws, each of these cities had a very fast reduction in the African American community. Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, East Palo Alto. And in 2002, when I was debating others' renter support groups on whether or not the city of Oakland should pass Measure EE, the city of Berkeley had become the whitest city in Alameda County, even though all of their rent control provisions were designed to protect cultural and ethnic diversity. I think that they really do need to look at this and let go of some of the political language and see what's actually happening with the demographics of these cities once these laws are imposed.
I think we're saying the same thing here. I mean, I agree with you that high wage earners have created a climate that allows real estate developers to take advantage of the economics. And I can guarantee you, because I'm on the front lines every day, that people are being displaced by the Ellis Act and conversion to TIC and condos, and it's high wage earners that are buying it, but it's real estate speculators that are taking advantage of the market, and that's what's displacing people.
Not really. Considering the size...
Hold on, Wayne. You'll get your chance. Go ahead.
Rent control doesn't displace people, just the opposite. It's designed to keep people housed, so the notion that rent control is somehow causing minorities to flee the Bay Area, it's hard to believe.
Well, what it does is it creates a situation where there is a favored tenant. If the rents are controlled and the costs are if the cost of operating the business is what I'm really saying is that it's the fact that you have high-income people with high creditworthiness. They tend to muscle out the people with low incomes and low creditworthiness, but not in all cities.
So, Wayne, would you
mostly in the cities with rent control.
Would you support rent control if it was means tested?
I would.
You would?
I would.
You think most landlords would?
Sure. Because then in that case, the rent control would be aimed at the people who actually need it. As it is in the city of Oakland, you have people on the shores of Lake Merritt living in luxury apartments and paying less than people who are living in East Oakland.
Joseph Tobener, would you support means testing and rent control?
I suppose I'm not against the idea, but how do you implement that? It's kind of laughable, really. I mean, if I'm a landlord, I'm just going to rent to the richest person that I can find. I mean, landlords are entitled to see how much income prospective tenants are making, so why not just rent to the person with means so that my unit's not under rent control? I don't see how you implement that.
Wayne Roland, we're almost out of time. Give you 30 seconds, and I'm going to give Joseph 30 seconds as well to make a final statement here. But isn't part of this, I mean, isn't this something that's been brought on by landlords by raising the rent as high as they have?
No, I don't think so. I think it's brought on by the fact that you have a supply and demand imbalance. And nothing is going to change until you correct that imbalance.
Joseph Tobener, final thoughts?
Well, I think this is about who you want to live next to. Do we want to have a city? Do we want to have cities filled with .comers who aren't invested in our city, who take buses down south to work and come home late at night? Or do we want to live by middle-income earners? Do we want to live next to our civil servants, our teachers, our artists, our musicians? Vibrant cities require diversity. Do we want to house elderly and disabled folks? Do we want to have minorities living next to us? Or do we want to allow runaway gentrification? And I think rent control helps keep people housed. Is it perfect? No. Are there problems at the state level that need to be addressed that allow for real estate speculators to take advantage of the market dynamics? Sure.
We got to wrap it up there.
Okay.
We got to wrap it. The tyranny of the clock. Joseph Tobener and Wayne Roland, I thank you both greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Again, Joseph Tobener is with Tobener Law Firm. He litigates for tenant rights, and he's a supporter of rent control. Wayne Roland is president of the East Bay Rental Housing Association. He opposes rent control. Again, there are 6 cities on November 8th will be considering rent control ordinances. They are San Mateo, Burlingame, Mountain View, Alameda, and Richmond. It's just past 7:31 in the morning. When we come back, we'll be in conversation with Tim Redman about the influence of tech money in this year's election in San Francisco. But first, we have these news headlines with Eileen Offendary.
Polling places are starting to open for early voting in the battleground state of Florida. Early voting by mail has been underway in Florida for weeks. Nearly 1.2 million voters in Florida already mailed in their ballots. The state has nearly 13 million registered voters. A victory in the state is critical to Donald Trump's hopes for capturing the 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. Trump is vowing to sue every woman who has accused him of sexual assault or other inappropriate behavior. Nearly a dozen women publicly have accused Trump of such behavior. The latest came on Saturday when Jessica Drake, an actress, said the billionaire kissed her and 2 other women on the lips without asking for permission when they met him after a golf tournament in 2006. Longtime political peace and social justice activist Tom Hayden has died at his Santa Monica home at the age of 76. Hayden had heart disease and had suffered a stroke last year. In 1960, he helped found Students for a Democratic Society, then dedicated to helping to desegregate the South. In 1962, he became one of the key authors of the landmark Port Huron Statement, a call to students on campuses everywhere to take up political protest. He was a leader in the movement against the Vietnam War and participated in the large protest outside the Democratic National Convention in 1968, which led to bloody clashes with police. At a conference last year, Hayden said that politics, media, and culture are totally out of balance today, in part because of a collective refusal to admit that the Vietnam War was wrong and the peace movement was right.
President Obama has reminded us to remember, he said, Selma, Seneca Falls, and Stonewall. But not Saigon, not Chicago, not Vietnam. We have to ask ourselves collectively why that omission exists and realize that only we can restore a place in the proper history of those times.
Tom Hayden dead at the age of 76. Religious and community leaders will hold a prayer vigil before this evening's meeting of a Concord City Council committee on the city's rental crisis. A coalition of religious, union, and economic justice groups is asking the Concord panel to recommend a moratorium on rent hikes until a more permanent solution is found. The group says rents have increased 60% over the last 6 years in Concord, now reaching an average of $1,700 a month. The advocates say more than half of Concord tenants pay more than 30% of their income for rent. Weather forecast for the San Francisco Bay Area, mostly cloudy skies, highs in the upper 60s, breezy, a slight chance of afternoon rain. In Fresno and the central San Joaquin Valley, a chance of morning showers, slight chance of thunderstorms, breezy, high 74 to 79 degrees. I'm Eileen Alfandary. More news on 94.1 at 8 o'clock.
And you're listening to Upfront on listener-supported KPFA. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Tim Redman joins me here in the studio. Tim Redman is a longtime San Francisco-based investigative and political reporter. He is founder of the web news site 48hills.org, where you can read his writings informally, maybe even currently, actually. He was the longtime editor of the San Francisco Bay Guardian newspaper. He's also co-host of a podcast that you can find at kpfa.org. I might even have this backwards, the Tim and Tom
The Tom and Tim Show.
The Tom and Tim Show.
We give Tom Amiano top billing. He has seniority over me in local politics.
It is a podcast you do with Tom Amiano.
I do it. It's a podcast I do with Tom Amiano, and it's fun because a lot of it is material that you would not be able to put on the actual radio, knowing Tom. Right. But it works fine on kpfa.org. And we do kind of a funny and lively 10-minute discussion of what's going on in San Francisco this week.
That's right, because not only is Tom Amiano a longtime politician, he's also a stand-up comedian. I don't know if you're a stand-up comedian, but I find you quite funny.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I should also note, actually, and I had to revise my intro there a little bit, you've got the Bay Guardian back.
We have the Bay Guardian back. We have back the rights to the name and publication and everything that goes with it. We are endeavoring right now to recreate the sfbg.com website, which is a little challenging because there's so much on it and we have to move it to a new place. We are working with the Internet Archive to scan all the back issues, and I've got one full set of back issues at the Bancroft Library, so we're really working on both archival and current. And meanwhile, we just put out a Bay Guardian endorsements issue.
And your second issue?
Our second issue since we took it over, and we will be doing a Bay Guardian Best of the Bay issue. Actually should come out by tomorrow, and which is the 50th anniversary of the Bay Guardian. Oh. And we also have East Bay endorsements up on the website, sfbg.com. So you can get both. You can go to sfbg.com and get a clip-out guide to our endorsements, and you can read all of our endorsements for San Francisco and our selected endorsements for the East Bay. And I just handed Mitch a copy. We have printed an endorsements issue, which may still be available in San Francisco. A lot of them have been picked up, but it's out there.
A lot thinner than this used to be.
It's a lot thinner than it used to be. We're just getting started again, and obviously we are a nonprofit. And we survived this. I mean, the endorsements issue was paid for entirely by advertising, and that's how the Best of the Bay issue will be paid for. And, maybe this time next year I'll come back and we'll have 150 pages.
Well, I think I know I feel this way. I bet a lot of people are happy that you're with the San Francisco Bay Guardian. So I think many of us are very happy about that. So, Tim Redman, we have you here so that we could talk about what's happening in San Francisco politics for this November 8th election. San Francisco has been dealing with this issue over gentrification for as long as I can remember, anyways. And the storyline is that, the average rent now is $3,500 or higher a month. It's a city now that's just for the rich, that poor people can't really, and middle-class people really can't afford to live in this city anymore. And there's a storyline out there, Tim, that it's a city perhaps that's now lost. It's not even worth fighting for. Now, perhaps that's just what I'm hearing from my own East Bay perspective here. So lay out for me, and for those who perhaps don't follow San Francisco politics closely, what is the political landscape today like in the city?
Well, you're right. It's not just gentrification. It's hyper-gentrification. It's happening. I mean, there's always been issues with gentrification and displacement and housing costs in San Francisco, certainly since I arrived in 1981. But it's happening at a much, much faster rate than anyone's ever seen before. It's just happening. In fact, we just put out on 48 Hills some data that was collected by the Council of Community Housing Organization. It's showing that every year 10,000 people who currently live in San Francisco are leaving, displaced by 10,000 or more new residents whose incomes are much, much higher. Now, I haven't given up on San Francisco, and I'm not going to give up on San Francisco. The thing that you have to remember is that there's a tremendous amount of rent-controlled housing in San Francisco. And there are a tremendous number of people who have been living in the city for a while who still have affordable rent entirely because of rent control. So there is a large population of tenants in San Francisco who, if we can protect rent control and stop them from being evicted, are still a middle income, lower income, working class base. We're losing it rapidly, but it's still there.
Do you have any sense of the percentage of the population, what that looks like?
Well, if you there's about 300 plus thousand housing units in San Francisco that are protected by rent control. But the problem, of course, is with Airbnb and with the Ellis Act and with all of these what we call low-fault evictions, landlords trying to find any reason to get the tenants out, people are being forced out of their homes at an extraordinary rate. And that's because, of course, if you're in a rent-controlled apartment and you've been living there for 20 years, maybe you're paying $1,200 a month rent, and the landlord knows if they can just get rid of you, they can jack that rent up to $4,000 for the next person. So that's one of the key battlegrounds is who is going to protect the existing housing stock, and also what are we going to do about building more affordable housing? And, there are people, there is one part of San Francisco politics that says all we need to do is just let the developers go wild and build as much more housing as they can, and eventually prices will come down.
And that will bring the...
Eventually, if we build... So the problem is that we're not building new housing.
The issue is demand, is what you're saying.
And that we don't have enough supply. Now, the problem with that theory is that all of the new housing that we're building in San Francisco is high-end. All of it is expensive luxury condos and high-end rentals. And that isn't really helping the housing market at all. The city's economists looked at this and said, if you built 200,000 new housing units in San Francisco, rents might come down a little bit. All right. I'm not even sure that would happen. So the question for San Francisco politics right now is how do we protect existing residents from displacement, and how do we build affordable, lower-cost housing for people so that we can actually still have, as you say, a city we're saving?
How does that play out on what people will be voting on their ballot on November 8th in San Francisco?
Well, it plays out in a couple of ways. The first way is there really are, it's almost as if there's two political parties in San Francisco today. And one is the progressives, who believe in stricter rent control, strict limits on what Airbnb can do to come into the city and encourage landlords to evict tenants so they can turn that into hotel rooms, and public sector and nonprofit housing solutions. The other party, although everybody's a Democrat in San Francisco, the other party, such as is really follows what what Mayor Ed Lee's philosophy has been, which is to use market-based solutions, to encourage the tech industry to come into San Francisco, to encourage them to use private shuttles to make it easier for their employees to work on the peninsula and live in San Francisco, and to just figure and to let the private developers kind of call the shots. And that side of things, there are highly contested elections for the 6 supervisor seats that are up. And in most cases, there are candidates from both sides. We have seen an unheard of amount of money pouring into the city to attack the progressive candidates and progressive ballot measures. $2.5 million, I think, will be spent to attack 4 reform ballot measures that the progressives have put on the ballot, and we can talk more about those. Close to $1 million will be spent in independent expenditures to attack the progressive candidates for supervisor. And all of that
right
money,
now, the progressives have a one-vote majority.
We have a one-vote majority on the board, but there are 6 seats up, including 3 progressive incumbents who are being termed out. Those seats are up. So unless the progressives win pretty much all 6 of the seats, that majority will go away, and the mayor, pro-tech, pro-market forces folks will be back in control. So, the stakes are so high, and the money is astonishing. There's a group called Progress SF, which is actually a state-chartered PAC based out of Sacramento, that has raised millions of dollars, almost all of it from Facebook, Google, big tech investors, and real estate. And that is being poured in massive amounts into the swing supervisor districts to try to attack and put down the progressive candidates. So it's a very high-stakes election, and I have not seen money like this coming into district races in San Francisco from outside the city in a long, long time.
Tech money.
And it's all, it's large, it's overwhelmingly money from tech companies and big tech investors. And what they can do, of course, Mitch, as you know, under Citizens United, is this group can raise $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, whatever $1 million in large chunks. And we're seeing people, tech companies giving $50, $100, $250,000. We're seeing the big investors, the likes of Ron Conway, putting up money in 100,000 and more chunks. And then that can go into independent expenditure committees. We have a pretty strict $500 campaign contribution limit in San Francisco. So if you're raising money, if you were to run for office in San Francisco, and I think that would be an excellent idea, by the way. I think it would be great if you ran for office.
I would have to move there.
You'd have to live there. I'd have to find an
affordable apartment.
But if you did, you could only raise money in $500 chunks. On the other hand, this dark money can come in from out of town into an independent expenditure committee that can go after you. And that's what we're seeing. We're not seeing the IEs saying, hey, our guy's a good guy or our woman's a good person. We're seeing the other person is awful, and we're seeing attack ads funded by this outside tech money.
Where is this money going?
Well, it's going right now into District 11, where progressive Kimberly Alvarenga is running against what they call moderates. I don't even think moderate is the right term. I think by San Francisco versions, they're conservatives because they believe more in market rate as opposed to public sector solutions. And
those two candidates
are Asha Safai and Kimberly Alvarenga. And we're seeing huge amounts of money going in to attack Kimberly. Now, in District 9, Hillary Ronen is the progressive candidate, and Josh Arce is the centrist, moderate, conservative, whatever you want to call it, candidate. And there's big tech money coming in to attack Hillary Ronen. We are starting to see this in District 1, where Sandra Lee Fewer, a current school board member, is running against Marjan Filhauer, and there's money coming in against Sandra Fewer. So they're looking at these districts, and they're saying, wow, we want to knock off the progressive candidates. I think we will soon see money in District 5, where Tenant advocate Dean Preston is running against incumbent London Breed. All of these races are really, really important. So, what I've been trying to tell people on the left in San Francisco is we got to win all six. We can't look at just supporting one candidate or just supporting another. We need to have a coherent strategy to try to win all six.
Again, we are in conversation with Tim Redman. Tim Redman is the founder of the news website 48hills.org, where you can read his writings. He's also, you're now the editor again of the San Francisco?
I'm the editor of the San Francisco Bay Guardian.
All right, good. Yeah. So again, that is fantastic. Maybe we should be clear. When we say tech money, what are we talking about? Can you unpack that for me?
We're talking about money from the big tech corporations and the venture capital investors who have put a lot of money and made a lot of money off of them. That's what we're talking about. And if you want to, you go to the Secretary of State's website and look up Progress San Francisco. That's sos.ca.gov. And you can go to the campaign finance filings yourself, and you can look at this list of money and where it's coming from. And as I say, it's Facebook, it's Google, it's Ron Conway, it's Reid Hoffman. I mean, it's all the big tech companies and investors.
Mark Zuckerberg becoming a political figure?
There's Facebook money, but not Mark personally. Yeah. I haven't seen him putting political money in, although I may have missed it. I mean, it's almost as if everyone who's made a lot of money in tech and real estate in San Francisco has come together to try to make sure that the mayor and his allies keep control of the city.
Why do they want the city council? What happens if they get the majority? What do they push?
Well, what they want, one thing that they want is they want continued incentives for tech companies to move into San Francisco. The other thing, though, among the things that they're really worried about are, for example, stricter regulations on Airbnb, stricter regulations on Uber and Lyft, the two companies that have taken over the taxi industry in San Francisco without limits. There are, I understand now, 37,000 Uber and Lyft cars driving around in San Francisco, which has made a terrible traffic situation even worse. And they're largely unregulated. And the other thing that's come up is what we call the Google buses. Now, anyone who lives in San Francisco has seen this phenomenon where the tech companies pay for these giant Wi-Fi-equipped luxury buses to pick up their workers on street corners in San Francisco in Muni bus stops, blocking the Muni buses, and take them, whisk them down the peninsula to their jobs in the peninsula. Now, what that does, of course, is it drives up housing costs along the Google bus lines, because if you can walk out your door and go half a block and get a free luxury Wi-Fi-equipped shuttle to work, it makes living in, for example, the Mission that much more valuable to you, so you pay more for those apartments. The supervisors authorized this program a couple of years ago and basically said, yes, the tech companies can run these private shuttles. Yes, they can stop in our public bus stops, and they pay us $1 a stop. right, which is virtually nothing. Some of the progressives on the Board of Supervisors are saying, wait a minute, these are clogging up the neighborhoods. They're driving up housing prices. Sure, let's have the shuttles so that people don't drive to work, but let's have staging areas. Let's say that, for example, they're all going to leave from one area where there's parking, say near the Cow Palace or south of Market, or let's have 4 or 5 locations where these buses gather, and the tech workers can, like the rest of us, take Muni to where the tech shuttles gather, right? They hate this. The tech industry hates this. They see this as an attack on the tech industry. So, the ability of the supervisors to tax companies that are making, we had a discussion of a tech tax this year where essentially there would be a increased business tax on companies who are in the technology field to pay for the damage that they have caused through gentrification to San Francisco. So there's a lot in terms of regulation and taxes that the Board of Supervisors can do.
Have they done things? I mean, there has been a one-vote majority by progressives on
There's a one-vote majority by progressives, and we have seen some new limits on Airbnb. In fact, there is a proposal now up before the Board of Supervisors to limit the number of days that you can rent out your house on Airbnb to 60 days. The tech tax did not pass, but it might. The one-vote majority has only been in place for about 8 months, and it takes a while for all this legislation to work its way through, but I think that we will, if the progressives continue with their majority, we may see another attempt to regulate the tech shuttles, the so-called Google buses. So the fact that we're seeing all of this money come in suggests that the tech industry is really worried about its dominance in San Francisco.
A few days ago, we did a program on the 17 measures on the statewide ballot, which I thought it was obscene. How in the world are we going to get through 17 measures, which we didn't. But looking at San Francisco, you have 24.
24 measures. And, people say, it's because the supervisors aren't doing their jobs. No, well, some of that's the case. But actually, you put the measures into different categories. Some of the measures on the ballot are revenue measures, tax and bond measures. And they're on the ballot because it's a presidential year. It's hard to pass bonds. You need a 2/3 majority. It's hard to pass any tax anywhere, including in San Francisco. So because we figure turnout will be so high, and as we both know, high turnout helps progressive causes generally, because everybody in San Francisco is going to come out to vote against Donald Trump, even though Hillary Clinton's going to win California by 20 points. People still...
You think it'll be a high turnout?
Oh, I think it'll be a fairly high turnout. Everyone I know just wants to go and push that ballot thing against Donald Trump. So people are going to... And presidential years are always higher turnouts. So with the higher turnout, people figured this was a good time to put revenue measures, a city college parcel tax, a mansion tax on properties worth more than $5 million, a school bond act. So some of it's that. There are 4 reform measures that are put on the ballot that we're seeing huge amounts of money against, again, because they would limit...
tech money again?
It's tech money and real estate money, because they would, in different ways, limit the power of the mayor. Now, I actually think that's a good thing. San Francisco has an extraordinarily powerful mayor. In a city with a strong mayor system, and there's a lot of cities in California with strong mayor systems. Berkeley is not one of them, but among cities with strong mayor systems, San Francisco's mayor, even by comparison, has a tremendous amount of power, appoints a majority or the entirety of every single commission in the city, has the ability to fill any vacancy in any elected office, and also has the ability to suspend any elected official purely because he believes they are guilty of misconduct. This is a very, very powerful position. So there's 4 measures. Proposition D, we call it elect our elected officials. Prop D would take away the ability of the mayor to replace a member of the Board of Supervisors if there's a vacancy. To me, that's just, constitutional law 101. The president doesn't replace members of Congress. If there's a vacancy in the state legislature, there's a special election. The governor doesn't appoint, right? Where do we get this idea that the chief executive should appoint members of the legislature? So that's Prop D. Prop H would create a new position called public advocate in San Francisco. Prop L would give the supervisors more control over the commission that oversees Muni. And Proposition M would create a new commission that would oversee the mayor's Office of Housing and Economic Development. The mayor hates all of these. The mayor's allies, the Ron Conways and tech people in the world, hate all of them and are putting up a vast amount of money to try to defeat these 4 reform measures. So you've got the revenue measures, you've got the reform measures, then you've got the typical let's it's an election year in San Francisco. Let's bash the homeless measures that were put on the ballot.
Tents on sidewalks.
There's the tents on sidewalks, which is Proposition Q, and then there's Proposition R, which creates a neighborhood crime quality of life police unit. And honestly, we both know who that's aimed at. We know what quality of life crimes.
Who are these brought by?
Well, these two are on the ballot because Scott Wiener and Mark Farrell, two supervisors, want a wedge issue to use in the fall election. Scott Wiener wants a wedge issue to use against Supervisor Jane Kim, who was running against him for state senate. That is a very, very important and major race in San Francisco, the Kim Wiener race, because it really does pit the two sides, the progressives versus the moderates, in a very serious way. And Wiener is very happy to have a measure on the ballot that attacks homeless people and says we're going to clear out all of the encampments because he wants to use it against Jane Kim. And he is. He's sending out mailers saying Jane Kim wants homeless tents everywhere in front of your house. The reality is this is a completely stupid measure that even the Chronicle can't support because it's already illegal to pitch a tent on the streets of San Francisco. This doesn't do anything except create a wedge issue.
We had both Kim and Wiener on over the last couple of weeks. I don't want to move away in our last couple of minutes here away from the influence of tech money. Yeah. Does tech money at all go into these social issues in the city, or just on issues that affect them personally?
We are not seeing a lot of, I haven't checked recently, but we are not seeing as much tech money on Prop Q. Although, let's move off for 1 second because there's two other things that are really
Q
important.
is the tent.
Yeah, Q is the tents, and R is the neighborhood crime thing. However, there is tremendous amount of real estate money coming into the city on two other measures that are really kind of ridiculous and awful, and that's Props P and U. You can remember them because PU, they stink. These are put on the ballot and funded entirely by the California Association of Realtors, not even the San Francisco Association there. The California Association of Realtors wants to mess with San Francisco's affordable housing projects. And basically, one of them says you can't build an affordable housing project unless you have 3 competing bids. Well, there's not that many people that build affordable housing in San Francisco. And, in a lot of projects, you just aren't going to get 3 nonprofits competing against each other. It will basically paralyze affordable housing in San Francisco. And the other one would allow developers who are building affordable housing to rent, quote, affordable units to people making up to 110% of median income, which would mean that wealthier people would get these units and lower income people would not. So why the California Association of Realtors has decided to spend $1 million messing with San Francisco's affordable housing boggles the mind, but they are.
Down to our final minute, I'm going to keep going back to this tech money because
it's a dramatic issue.
And you said at the beginning of our conversation that it's unprecedented, the amount of money that we're seeing from the tech industry in this election. Is this the arrival of this political power?
Well, it's not the arrival, but I think it's the tech industry, which has always been, or certainly for the last 4 or 5 years under Mayor Lee, has been powerful in San Francisco. They are now trying to show just how powerful they can be. Yeah. And they are really flexing their muscles, the big money. And this now appears, at one point, real estate and development interests were the dominant force in San Francisco politics because of their money. And I think the tech industry is trying to show that we are now going to be the dominant force in San Francisco politics. And if that's the case, Mitch, if that works, we may be approaching the point we started the show with where, my God, can we even save the city?
Tim Redman, thank you very much.
Happy to be on your show.
Again, Tim Redman has been our guest, longtime San Francisco-based investigative and political reporter. He is the editor of 48hills.org, where you can read his writings. And again, he's back as the editor of the San Francisco Bay Guardian, which now has its endorsement. Is this as easy to find as the Guardian used to be?
Well, it's the endorsement issue was always hard to find. We've had it out for a week and a half now, and they get picked up really quickly. Yeah. We are not printing as many as we used to because we can't afford to, but we hope that'll go up. But in the meantime, if you don't find it on the streets, sfbg.com has everything right there, an easy printout guide for you to print out and take to the polls.
Thank you again.
Of course.
And it's just past 7:58 in the morning, and that does it for Upfront. The show is produced by Deanna Martinez, Lima Hamarani, and Nicole Bennett-Fight. Kirsten Thomas is our engineer. Kat Brooks, she'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mitch Jeserich, wishing you a good day.
The presidential election is fast approaching, and thanks to you, KPFA will be able to continue our wide-ranging coverage. Our goal is to provide you with multiple viewpoints and unfiltered information you won't hear from corporate media outlets. Beginning Wednesday, November 2nd, through the day after the election, Wednesday, November 9th, join us for 7 days of fact-filled, inclusive reporting and analysis from the Bay Area's truly independent media outlet, KPFA.
Demand the Impossible is a thrilling radical manifesto. This will be presented by writer Bill Ayers with Bernardine Dorn, former weatherfolk, now fierce social justice activists. Thursday, December 1st at St. John's Presbyterian Church, 2727 College Avenue in Berkeley. There's free parking and wheelchair access at this KPFA benefit. Advance tickets at brownpapertickets.com and indie bookshops. For Bill and Bernardine, December 1st.